Thank you. Yeah, this is my Christmas sweater. I always make sure I wear it for a Sunday every Christmas, every winter, at some point. You know, my sister got it for me because she knows I have cats, and my niece, she calls me the cat lady. That's what she calls me. The cat lady.
Well, I'm a cat short of crazy, so.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, because I was single and I had 2 cats, and so she started calling me the cat lady. And so, I mean, whenever a 6-year-old calls you a cat lady, you can't get mad. But now she's 16 and still calls me a cat lady, and so now it's annoying. No. So, right, yeah. So it's been a while since we've been able to get together. This winter's been a little crazy because sometimes we haven't been getting together because of either ice or temperature. So we've been talking about Job, and we really haven't been going verse by verse, but we've been kind of going through it topically and the topics in Job. We might end up cutting the class a little short at the end of December, so that means maybe one more Sunday. The elders, I think, might have a plan for Sunday morning Bible class, so if we want, we can pick up Job at another time. But one of the things I wanted to do in Job was talk about grief, and we talked about the process of grief not last class, but the class before that. And it went well, and I feel like people enjoyed it. So we talked about counseling grief, because Job's story involves grief a whole lot, right? Job himself, the entire book of Job, is the product of grief. It is Job going through grief, and this debate that he has with his friends, calling it a debate is generous, but it's in the middle of his grief. And then after that, I thought to myself, well, we need to talk about counseling grief. We need to talk about being there for people who are in the middle of grieving, because Job's friends were there, but they weren't really there for him. They did a really good job at the very beginning, right? They sat with him for 7 days without saying a word. But then Job spoke, and Job opened up his mouth and started cursing the day he was born, right? Which is kind of what you would expect from someone who loses everything, right? Loses all of his children, loses all of his wealth. But instead of Job's friends being compassionate and trying to console and comfort Job, instead they want to disprove what Job has said, and they want to assert their beliefs that Job is guilty, right? That what happened to Job is actually because of God's anger. And because of the first 2 chapters of Job, we know very specifically that what happens to Job is not because God is punishing him. We know that. And Job himself, even though he's ignorant of the spiritual scene behind what's going on, he defends himself, and he says, I have given God no reason to be angry with me. And then you launch into that discussion between Job and his friends, where Job's friends keep saying, you're guilty, God wouldn't do this to someone who's not guilty, and Job keeps saying, no, I'm not guilty, I'm innocent, I've been serving God with everything that I have. So, we talked a little bit last time about how to help people in the middle of grief. And so let's review just a little bit of what we've been talking about so far. We have these verses that show Job's initial reaction, for his initial grief, right? This is the form his grief takes on initially. Job 1:20 says, Job arose and tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. Chapter 2, verse 7 and 8 says, So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. So this is his initial response to the tragedy that has befallen him, right? He grieves in tearing his robe, shaving his head, falling on the ground, but he also worships God, right? Whenever he is stricken with sores all over his body, he scrapes himself to itch the sores, and then he sits in the ashes in the sense that he goes to the local dump as an outcast, as someone who no one wants to be around him, right? And so when we think about how do we comfort people in these kind of moments, right? Grief. Grief is a normal response to the loss of any significant person, object, or opportunity. It is an experience of deprivation and anxiety that can show itself in one's behaviors, emotions, thinking, physiology, interpersonal relationships, and spirituality. So grief itself is a very normal response, right? When we talk about the New Testament, and we talk about how Jesus alters our grief, I brought up these 2 points. That one, Christ has changed the meaning of grieving. The very reality of an afterlife alters the way we grieve, because then grieving is no longer the end, right? When we grieve, when we lose someone, there is the reality of reuniting with them. And secondly, Christ showed the importance of grieving. Even the perfect human Jesus Christ grieved, even though he is absolutely perfect and he committed no sin. So even if you are thinking everything right, even if you are doing everything absolutely right, you are still going to grieve, meaning grieving is just part of living life as a human. When Lazarus died and he was about to raise him, he grieved with Lazarus' sisters, right? You have, whenever he was about to experience his crucifixion the night before, he grieved for what was about to occur. You have Solomon in Ecclesiastes who says, there's a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. The reality of heaven makes our grieving lighter, but it does not eliminate it. We still grieve. And so we talked a little bit about how to help people in the middle of grieving, right? Helping people with grieving, it's not about saying the right things. It's about really being there. It's more about presence, patience, compassion, Christ-like love. You will find yourself trying to say the right things and trying to find the right words, but you have to suppress that urge. When you're talking to someone who's going through it, it's not always about what you say. More often, it's just about being there. And as Christians, we have responsibilities to be with people who are grieving, right? Just some of the passages. We have Romans 12, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. 1 Thessalonians 4:18, after Paul talked about the resurrection and Christ's return, bringing us to heaven, he said, therefore encourage one another with these words. You have James 1:27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep one unstained from the world. The fact that he says in their affliction, I think implies that he's talking about people who are newly orphaned or newly widowed, right? When they lose their parents or when they lose their spouse, in the middle of their affliction, that's whenever you visit them to take care of them, right? So we have plenty of these verses about helping people who are grieving. And so considering these passages, Job's friends really failed to live up to this. Job's friends really failed all over. They were supposed to bear Job's burdens, but instead they really added to his burdens. They were to weep with him, and instead they kind of just blamed him. They were to encourage him, instead they discouraged him. They were to give him comfort, instead they added to his distress. And they were supposed to visit him in his affliction, and they did visit him, but only ended up hurting him more. And so when we are talking about grieving, when we're talking about helping people in the middle of grieving, these are some of the points we have discussed. Encourage discussions about death before it occurs. This is one of those situations where, before the tragedy occurs, if the tragedy is not sudden, if you can see the tragedy occurring, try to be prepared for it. Encourage discussion about what's going to happen whenever this person passes and experiencing it. It doesn't eliminate the grieving, but it makes it lighter, right? To, that grieving process, if you can kind of start that emotional roller coaster, emotional process before the death even takes place, that will make the process when it happens that much easier, right? And so the most important thing, and I've said this already, be present and available. And this is where Job's friends really shine, at least in chapter 2. It says, "Now when Job's friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came, each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come show him sympathy and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great." Had the story ended here, this would have been an awesome example of good friends, right? This is exactly what we need to do in these sort of situations. Whenever someone is grieving, you just need to make a time to go visit, and you just need to be with them. Don't worry about the words, just be there, right? This is the same thing Jesus did with Mary and Martha when Lazarus had passed. He went, of course, he went to go resurrect him, but he went, and the first thing he did was he wept with Mary and Martha, and he just spent some time with them. On top of this, I think it's important to note that Job's friends were there for a week, right? Grief is not just a one-time thing, and oftentimes, that first week is the hardest week, of course. Sometimes when people are going through the grieving process, especially at the beginning, whenever they're still in shock, they don't think of the things that they have to take care of, right? This is a lot of times why whenever someone loses another, we make meals for them and we bring meals to them, because on top of what they're already going through, they don't need to worry about what am I going to eat, right? And those small things that you can do for them, whether it's cleaning their house, mowing their lawn, just the small things to take off of their plate so that they can continue through that grieving process. Because a lot of the times they're so much in shock that they don't even consider these things, right? They don't even consider what's going on. They might skip meals. They might not think to drink. Their house might be in ruin. They may not be able to take care of their children as much, right? So assisting with doing things for people who are right in the middle of going through it is just one of the best ways you can help them, right? In this point, listen, say little. People in grief say very difficult things. People in the middle of grief, their mind goes to such a dark place, and they're going to express pain, doubt, confusion, and a lot of the times when they say things, they may not mean it. Maybe they mean it in that moment, but they might think to themselves, days later, that was wrong. But they're in the middle of when emotions are just so hot, and they have to get that out of their system, right? That is not a time to rebuke them. That is not a time to correct them. That's a time to, like James 1:19 says, to be slow to speak, being quick to hear, being slow to speak, slow to anger. Proverbs 21:23. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Yes, Shirley.
Another thing that I've found, even with myself, no matter how long the illness was or how short it was, the loved one closest to the caregiver tends to take some kind of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
If I'd have done this, what if I'd have done? I should have done this.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't have done this. I mean, I'd taken care of Terry. He'd been ill for a good 3 years. But the last 7 weeks was in hospice. And, I mean, we knew, we had planned, and we had everything in order the best we could. And it was just 7 weeks, and it was a hard process. I was the caregiver. And unless you've been in those shoes, you don't realize how tired, how emotional, how stressful it is. And on Wednesday night, it just had been a bad day all the way around. And I said, Lord, you're going to have to carry me. I just can't, I need more than you just walking with me. I need you to carry me.
Right.
I got up Thursday morning and his toes were blue.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean that.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Mm-hmm. And so I immediately thought it was because of what I said. It wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time I thought it was. So sometimes you hear that, and you just have to let them say it because they think it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Something else, the Lord clap, when Terry passed, got me this little paperback book. I don't remember what they are. They're not expensive at all. On Amazon. It's called Good Grief, and it's a Christian-based book, and it's just something that you can read in sections or all at once or whatever, and it's just called Good Grief. And let me look.
It's a good book.
Granger Westberg is the author. There's different ones out there, but that's excellent. I've given those.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah, and it's good to have recommendations like that for when people are going through it. Absolutely.
I buy them sometimes and just hand it.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. Someone handed me a book one time called Fierce Goodbye, and it was a book specifically when someone commits suicide, and it's a really powerful book that I try to give to people when something like that happens. Good Grief is a really good one. There's a couple others. I have a couple more in my library that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's some good literature out there, especially with people who are going through grief. It's really good to have them have some sort of regimen to make sure that they're properly digesting everything and properly going through the process. Of course, the first week it happens, it may not be the right time, but just to make sure that they don't go through a little bit of the grief process and then tuck it away, because that stuff is going to come out later and it's going to burst, right? So I think, having a book that they can slowly go through, having a group that they can go visit once a week or once a month, having some sort of structure, a structured, organized way of getting through the grieving process is very, very beneficial. So thank you, Shirley. So last time we were together, we read Job's words in chapter 3. I'll read them again. This is important because Job talks quite a bit. He says things that are very hard to hear. If your friend was saying these things, it'd be hard to hear him say that. I asked, how do you respond to this? And Shirley gave the right answer. You don't say anything, you just give him a hug. So let's read some of what Job says. It says, Then Job opened his mouth and cursed the day he was born. He said, I wish the day I was born would be lost forever. I wish the night they said, it's a boy, had never happened. I wish that day had remained dark. I wish God above had forgotten that day and not let any light shine on it. He says, why didn't I die when I was born? Why didn't I die as I came from my mother's womb? Why did my mother hold me on her knees? Why did her breasts feed me? If I had died when I was born, I would be at peace now. I wish I were asleep and at rest with the kings and their advisors who built palaces that are now in ruins. Why must a suffering person continue to live? Why let anyone live such a bitter life? Such people want to die, but death does not come. They search for death more than for hidden treasure. They would be happy to find their grave. They would rejoice to find their tomb. But God keeps their future a secret and builds a wall around to protect them. When it is time to eat, all I can do is sigh with sadness, not joy. My groans pour out like water. I was afraid something terrible would happen, and what I feared most has happened. I cannot calm down or relax. I am too upset to rest. These are words that are very common, this kind of sentiment, when people lose someone. A lot of the times they'll say something like, I wish this never happened. I wish I was never born. They'll say things like, why is God testing me? They're going to say things like, why did God do this? And that's not the time to have a debate. That's the time to just love them and to just be there for them, right? And Job here, a note that's kind of important is that while Job's words may sound suicidal, I'm not sure if he actually was suicidal. But here's the thing, when someone says something like that, you need to take it seriously in case they are, right? That means you probably don't need to leave them alone for a while. That means you need to talk to them. That means you need to be there, because there's saying you wish you were dead, then there's making a plan to die, and then there's killing yourself, right? And so whenever they say they wish they were dead, you got to take it seriously in case they are being for real. Because a lot of people say, oh, I wish I had never been born, I wish I was dead, I wish I would die. And they don't actually get to the next step of having a plan to take their own life, right? If they have a plan to take their own life, that is the time that you got to take them to the emergency room right then and there and get them psychologically evaluated, and they may need to stay in a facility for a little bit, or, that's the best case scenario. If you can't get them to the emergency room, then you definitely don't need to leave them alone. But I say this because if you hear someone saying words like this, make sure you take it seriously. Make sure you get a group of people together to watch over them, to be with them for a while, and to make sure that it doesn't evolve to the next step and then evolve to the next step, which is taking their life. And that's kind of a side note. I don't think with what Job has actually gone through, if he was suicidal, I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying it would be understandable, wouldn't it? Because he lost everything. And unfortunately, this is just a reality of life. We don't want anyone to take their lives. But, if Job has actually gone through all of this, now that I think about it, if Job has gone through everything he has, and then he says, I wish I would die, you might not want to leave him alone. You know what I mean? Okay. And this kind of gets to the next point of you kind of just have to let them express themselves. Not in the sense of that you don't listen, not in the sense of you don't take them seriously, but again, it's let them talk and you listen, right? And let them know that getting the words out and getting the emotions out is actually a good thing, right? Let them express it. If they just bottle it up, it's not a good thing. They putting words to thoughts and emotions, there's something very powerful there. And sometimes the thoughts and the emotions don't go away until we vocalize it, right? And so let them vocalize it, right? Don't be surprised when there's lots of crying, when there's frustration. Don't be surprised when they withdraw, but just make sure they know that you're there, right? In my experience, the earlier you are in the grieving process, the less you need to talk. And as they slowly come out of that shock, then you can start actually talking to them. But when they're in the middle of that shock within the first week, couple weeks, first month, you're not going to be able to have a very rational conversation, right? Shock is such a serious thing that they may not even remember what occurs, right? It's a very unique thing. But in those moments, you can encourage discussion. You do want them talking, but it's not going to be so much of a discussion. You want them talking, you want them to express themselves, but you're not trying to reason with them at that point, right? I think one of the best things you could do is go through photographs together, right? Look at the treasured possessions, ask for stories, right? These can be very therapeutic and help them throughout that process. An important thing, Do not correct their statements about God or life, especially at the beginning. Maybe once things settle and you're maybe a month away, a couple months away, right? And maybe then you can start to talk to them. If they keep saying that they're mad at God even 3 months later, you probably need to have a little bit of a conversation gently and just talking to them throughout these things. But at the beginning, they're going to say these things. Like Job had said, I wish I'd never been born. I can't see the point of living. Why didn't I die as a baby? Your response should not be, don't say that. You shouldn't feel that way. Well, that's not biblical. At the beginning, that should not be your response at all. And really, that shouldn't be your response, period. But when those moments come later in the grieving process, you can be a lot more gentle about it, right? Because, like I said, in the moment that Job says these things, he might believe them right then and there, but his rational mind is on pause, right? His rational mind will probably kick in. I tell you that Job, before this tragedy occurs, and Job at the end of the book of Job, does not believe the things that Job says in chapter 3, right? At the end of the book of Job, I guarantee you, he does not believe he wished he had died. He does not believe that he wishes he had never been born. But in that moment, because of the emotions he's experiencing, he's searching for words to describe how terrible he feels. And so he's going to say the most terrible thing he can think in order to give words to the pain, right? And so correcting someone's lament is a mistake. That's the mistake that Job's friends make, right? On top of that, do not speak for God in these moments. Job's friends tried to speak for God, and God was angry with them. When we're addressing the grieving, you don't need to say, God needed another angel, or this was God's plan, or everything happens for a reason, or God won't give you more than you can handle. Don't say those things. They can say these things, but you don't say these things. Because if they're not ready for those concepts, right, then that will cause their pain to be even greater. Right? If they're not in a situation where they're ready to accept that maybe some good can come out of it, if they're not ready to accept maybe God has a plan, if they're not ready to accept these concepts, then it's gonna hurt them more in the long run, and it's gonna damage your relationship with them, right? It's okay for them to find comfort in these things, but you really have to let them come to it. You really have to let them say these things. And if they say these things, just mildly agree. You don't need to press it anymore. Avoid saying things like, at least. Well, at least he lived a long life. At least you can have more kids. At least she's in a better place. At least you're young. These give the sense of that the pain that they're going through isn't that great, when it is. Instead, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm here for you, this is hard, but I'm going to go through this with you. Don't try to make sense of it. That's something they have to do. They have to make sense of it, right? They need compassion, not explanations, right? Don't say this happened because. Don't say God's teaching you something. Just say we're going to face this together. You can echo what God says, but as long as you're very, very vague. You can say, well, God's near the brokenhearted. Jesus weeps with the grieving. God, blessed are those who mourn. God will make everything right in heaven. You can remind them of heaven. That's a good thing to do, but just, again, let them do most of the talking. Don't think poorly of people who doubt God, especially in the midst of pain. Some of the people with the strongest of faith doubted God: Job, David, Jeremiah, even biblical characters with great faith question God while grieving. Like the book of Job. Job says, God did me wrong, and Job had a faith that is supreme, right? Job was top-notch, right? So don't correct their emotions. Don't offer lectures. Say things like, it makes sense that you feel that way. You can say things like, God can handle your questions. You can remind them of Job and say, even Job felt this way. You're not agreeing with their statements, you're empathizing, right? You're agreeing with the emotions that they're experiencing. Let them know that it's normal to feel that way. You know, us humans, we're not really great at expressing our emotions properly. Oftentimes we express them in ways that are not right, that are exaggerated, we use the wrong words. They might say things like, my pain's unbearable, my life feels pointless, I don't see a way forward. And a lot of the times, strong emotions make us forget everything else. We forget the blessings of life. We only see the problem in front of us, right? And for Job, he just needed to vocalize this pain to help him get through it, right? When someone talks like Job, understand that they're overwhelmed. And being overwhelmed is a type of irrationality. It's not rational, right? You can ask questions like, what is hurting you the most right now, right? You can say, tell me about your pain. You can say things like, how can I help you with this, right? You're not saying, yes, I agree with you, life isn't worth living. You're not saying what you're saying. You're saying, your anguish makes sense given what you've been through. That's what you're saying. Say, I understand why you feel that way. You can even say, I would feel very similar if I was in your position, right? We always have that tendency to say, I know what you're going through. And in a sense, you do, because you can comprehend, yeah, what you're going through is really terrible, and in my mind, I can fathom that what you're going through is bad. But at the same time, really, people who are going through it, they don't want to hear, I know what you're going through. Because every person who hurts feels like their hurt is unique. And in a way it is, right? Every pain is like a snowflake in that way. It's different. And so saying, I know what you're going through, that's not a good thing to say, because some people just don't like hearing that. You can say, I understand why you feel that way. You can say, I felt something similar, and even then you don't want to hit on that, because then it sounds like you don't want to make it sound like you're making it about you. You're not trying to make it about you. Make sure you don't make it about yourself, but you don't want them to think you're making it about yourself. And when you keep saying, I know what you're going through, that's your way of trying to connect to them, but it can sound to them like you're trying to make it about yourself. Right? So you want to avoid that, right? It's not the biggest mistake in the world, but you kind of want to just be careful of what you say and how you say it. You want to connect with them, but I think especially in that initial stage, connecting with them is not really going to be done through so much of the words as it is just your presence, right? And then as things go on, then you can kind of have conversations with them where you can connect with them, right? And sometimes, like I said, sometimes they'll say things that they shouldn't. And there comes a time later on, I wouldn't say within the first stages of maybe the first initial week, the first initial month, when it does come time to kind of challenge their thoughts. If they keep saying, I'm mad at God, if they keep saying, God did this to me, if they keep saying that, then you can start, and like the bargaining that Shirley mentioned, if they keep saying, it's my fault, if I hadn't done this, then this. If they keep saying that, there is going to come a time whenever you want to gently try to get them to reconsider, right? And very carefully, make sure they're not in the middle of the shock, but there are times to get them to reconsider and to make them understand that it wasn't your fault, right? Offering assistance, right? Helping the grieving make decisions, but gently try to discourage making big decisions, right? In those times, you want to avoid, they need to avoid making big decisions until at least a few months have passed, because they're not thinking clearly. They just aren't. You don't want them to sell their house within the first couple of months. You don't want them to move to another part of the country within the first couple of months. And there are maybe some differences if their family is with them, it makes it a little bit not as bad, but at the same time, they might make that decision and then later on, once they're kind of done with the grieving process, regret it, right? they're just almost like whenever they're going through the grieving process, they're kind of a different person, if that makes sense. And when they come out of the grieving process, they don't quite revert, but they kind of revert a little bit back to it, right? It's just, I'm not saying it well, but when they're in the middle of the grieving process, they're not the same. They just aren't, right? And so when these things happen, your job is going to be to give them practical help with things. Preparing meals, babysitting, right? Trying to provide what you can. This is what James talked about, right? Pure and undefiled religion before God is visiting orphans and widows in their affliction. You know, that word visit, it means more than just being next to them. Jesus said, I was sick and you visited me. You know, the visiting of a sick person is more than just going and being in their presence. It implies taking care of the person. So when we're talking about visiting orphans and widows in their affliction, we're talking about taking care of orphans and widows in their affliction. Because it doesn't mean anything if you take a step into their home and just leave. That doesn't mean anything. But to go and be there in their presence and to assist them. That word visit is often used to describe how God provides for his people and takes care of them. The word is used by Paul to talk about visiting churches to check on them, right? So the word implies taking care of someone. And so, you know, when someone is going through it, what are some ways that we can help them? Shirley?
Well, other than just, actually going and visiting, which is okay, but that's short term. You can offer having in your home to eat, have a game night or something. Take them out, call them, text them, send them a call. Any number of things, just to let them know you're there. And by the way, grieving, it is stages, but it'll pop its head up when you think you're done, and you're not.
Yep.
And so you may keep your eyes open, because sometimes if you've been through it, you recognize the stages. And if you see somebody struggling that way, give them a helping hand, do something.
Right.
Pay attention. That's the biggest thing. Keep your eyes open.
Absolutely. I like the idea of taking them out of the house, because some people, they don't go to work, or depending on what stage of life they're in, but some people will withdraw, and they will want to be by themselves, and they won't leave the house for long periods of time, and getting them out of the house is very helpful. Even if you are, you bring a whole group to them and visit them, and everyone's happy to be around them and they're sad, it's still worth it to do. We have to think of very practical things. And one of the important things is, when someone is grieving, you can't just say, if you need anything, let me know. That really doesn't do much, because they don't know what they need, right? You have to think of specific things to offer. Can I mow your lawn this weekend? I'm going to the store. Can I pick you anything up? Can I bring dinner Thursday? Can I watch the kids tonight, right? Specific things to help them, because if you ask them, what do you need, that gives them one more thing that they have to do, is trying to figure out, what do I need? And a very important thing is praying with them. A small prayer, once you visit, does so much. Your prayer might just be 30 seconds, but it is so, so powerful to do. They need this small reminder that you can go to God for help, right? And it's more powerful than just telling them to pray. Or also, when you're there, you can read a Bible passage, right? Bring your Bible, open it up, and read a passage while you're with them, and talk about it just for a second. And that gives them the reminder that in difficult times we need to come to God's Word. That's very, very powerful. After some time, encourage them to move forward, right? And that's after some time. That's very, very important, right? A lot of people may not want to reach out, but you need to, there comes a point where they have to start establishing a new lifestyle, right? So especially if it's like their spouse or their parent, the closer the person who passed with them is, the more important it is that they establish new habits and lifestyle, right? Because they have to move, they have to adjust, they have to create a new life where their spouse isn't in the same bed with them. You know, if they spent most of their time with their spouse, if their spouse was a close friend, they got to figure out what to do to fill that gap rather than sitting home alone and doing nothing and being lonely. Right? And that's why grief groups and widow groups are so awesome. That's why church is so great, that coming and you can fill the void somewhat, right? To some degree. I'm not saying that you can replace them. That's not what I'm saying. But you need to establish a new life. You need to have things in your life that bring you joy. Whenever something really large in your life that brought you joy is taken away from you, right? You can encourage them to kind of, Shirley, did you have something? Go ahead.
Well, I just thought of something I did, and it goes right with what you're saying. Once I got over it a little, and I didn't give myself a lot of time, so I was right back. The first Sunday, I was back, which I needed. I needed my family. And then I started thinking about who can I help, and I picked somebody, a family. And I called and said, can I bring a meal? And they were like, yeah. And so I got to know them really well. And you cannot do it once. It's an ongoing
Yes,
thing.
it is.
But it helps. And what I found out was, I got a lot more out of it than they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me with my grief so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, getting out and doing something. I think one of the most important things about just joy in general is focusing on others, right? And grief makes you focus on yourself quite a bit. What do I have to do? I'm in such great pain. And so one of the milestones of overcoming grief is turning your perception more outward. Right? And so, and that will help your grieving process if you start thinking, okay, how can I help this person? And again, sometimes people are grieving in a way where like, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. Get them thinking of, how can we help others, right? What's this person need? What's this person do? What's something I can do over here, right? You want them to slowly remove those blinders where they're not just focusing on themselves. So I got one more thing I want to mention, and then I'll be done, okay? We have to know our limitations. And I've kind of mentioned this a little bit before about suicide. Know that you cannot overwork yourself. You cannot do it alone. You need 2 or 3 people or a group checking on them rather than just you, right? You cannot fill the void of the deceased. And you got to be careful that they're not becoming dependent upon you and in an unhealthy way, that they're replacing the person they lost with you. Right? There are some red flags, and if you see these red flags, it's really important that you don't try to handle them, that you bring it up with a professional, right? And I think in this situation, you'd bring it to me, the elders, and we'd probably consider whether we need to bring in an actual professional and get them to some sort of counselor, right? So, like I mentioned, suicidal thoughts, if those persist, then yeah, you need to definitely consider those. Ask gentle questions. Are you feeling unsafe? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Right? That's a number one immediate red flag. Inability to function in daily life over time. That's normal short term. If they still can't function 4 months later in daily life, then something is wrong. Right? That is complicated or unhealthy grief. There is severe escalating anxiety, panic attacks, trauma responses. This may be reasonable with what they've gone through, but a professional needs to deal with these. Intense, prolonged anger, rage, or blame. complicated or persistent guilt, and we kind of mentioned this. It's my fault they died. God has punished me. I deserve this suffering. If they keep saying these things over time, then you have to bring in a professional, right? Social withdrawal becomes isolation, alcohol, drugs, addictive behaviors, hallucinations, hearing voices of the deceased, losing touch with reality, right? A grief that doesn't ease over time. Typically 6 months, they say, you should be getting back to you should be able to live normal life. It still will hurt, don't get me wrong. There's self-destructive behavior where they're doing things taking unnecessary risk and neglecting their health. Inability to talk about the loss. In these situations, I just had to bring this up. In these situations, that is a moment to say, this is bigger than what I can handle. Right? And you need to bring in other people. You need to bring in the elders. You need to bring in me. I have a list of counselors whenever I got here. I have a list of Christian counselors that I vetted, that I feel very confident of, that we can send them to. They need some sort of professional. One of the things about counseling, or just being there for someone who's hurting, you need to know when you need a professional, right? And so that's why I wanted to put this page up. So next week, we'll talk a little bit more about Job, and I mentioned we might have different Sunday morning Bible class plans come January. I have to verify that, but I'll let you guys know next week. Okay. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you guys. Sorry we went over just a little bit.